Hey everyone, welcome to today's video where we're gonna have a look at Intel stock, its history and its future. In today's fast-moving technology landscape, I think it's very often that the customer is the one that is deciding the fates of the biggest companies. A single shift in consumer demand can send essentially shockwaves through the entire industry. We've seen that with Nvidia over the past couple of years. The company out of nowhere seemingly like skyrocketed and became the largest company on the planet. And although it lost that position since then, it's still up there, in the top 10 and essentially top 3 or 5 biggest companies on the planet. And as things look right now, we could possibly see Nvidia regaining back its title already in a few months. But going back to Intel, I think it all started, when the Intel kind of didn't listen to the customers and didn't foresee where the market was moving to. In the early 2010s, as the world was moving towards smaller, more efficient mobile devices, with the revolution of, the smartphones, the iPhone moment in 2007, just a few years earlier than 2010, still Intel remained focused on producing larger stationary chips for desktop and the servers mainly. I think this is the critical misstep on behalf of Intel and especially the board of directors as the smartphone revolution was taking hold, which nearly cost Intel its dominant position in the semiconductor industry already back like 5 to 10 years ago. But now I think things are looking really, really dire. But the question is then, how did Intel, which was at a point the undisputed leader, find itself playing catch up, and what is the company is doing right now that is gonna make it potentially to bounce back. So in this video we're gonna have a closer look into the potential outcomes over the up and coming few years for Intel, and if this is actually a potential once in a lifetime opportunity for investors. Before we get into the details about Intel's potential 18A process and their fight with TSMC, as well as AMD, I think it's very important to look at the history of the company. So in 1968, Intel was founded by Robert Noyce and Gordon Moore. The now legendary Gordon Moore with his very special quote of essentially the transistor density doubling for every 18 months, and that's something that has essentially been a Moore's law that everyone knows in this space. So these two pioneers who played a significant role in shaping the semiconductor industry, and then Intel quickly became known for its groundbreaking work in the microprocessors, which revolutionized the computing, you would say. The company's first major success came with the introduction of the 4004 microprocessor in 71, and they followed it by the famous x86 architecture in 78, which would power the personal computing revolution. Now, interestingly, as Intel grew, it faced competition from companies like AMD, which emerged as a significant competitor in the market. AMD, founded by Jerry Saunders and a group of Fairchild semiconductor employees, which created a product that challenged essentially Intel's dominance and driving a competition between these two fierce rivals ever since the early 70s. And the interesting part is that Jerry Saunders had a very famous quote a few years back, probably decades back, where he said that big men have fabs. What he was referring to that in the semiconductor space, in the 70s and 80s, there was a lot of competitors out there, but with essentially every couple of years, a few of these competitors couldn't hang in there with Intel and AMD, so they starting to go bankrupt or being purchased by AMD and Intel. And as time went on, by 2009, only essentially AMD and Intel was left in the x86 market. They were dominating the market, and of those two, obviously Intel was by far the biggest player. But AMD was doing good until they had to sell their fabs in the early 2000s, and that's when essentially Intel was remaining as the sole competitor in terms of both design and manufacturing. Remember that AMD was still doing fairly okay, but they now didn't have their fabs. So only Intel was able to design and manufacture in the same company. So from early 2000s through 2017, Intel maintained a dominant position in the semiconductor industry, but the company faced mounting challenges as the landscape began to shift essentially. One of the longest standing competitors, obviously AMD, experienced quite a, let's say, hectic period after launching its bulldozer architecture back in 2011. Bulldozer, which failed to meet expectations and caused AMD to lose market share and essentially made AMD to be almost on the verge of bankruptcy. Well, honestly, they were on the verge of bankruptcy. It wasn't so surprising to see articles every week about AMD getting like very close to bankruptcy anytime. However, this downturn set the stage for one of the most remarkable comebacks in the tech history. In 2017, AMD unveiled its Zen architecture, a revolutionary design that reshaped the competitive dynamic in the industry. Zen marked a turning point for AMD thanks to a breakthrough innovation, the chiplet architecture. The chiplet architecture, instead of relying on a single large monolithic chip like Intel's design, AMD introduced a sort of modular approach. The chiplet model allowed AMD to design smaller chips, higher yield chiplets that could be interconnected, offering scalability and flexibility needed to produce both consumer and enterprise processors from the same fundamental architecture. In a sense, AMD's strategy was akin to building one chip to rule them all, or more precisely, one chiplet that could be used across the product lines. This allowed AMD to scale its Ryzen CPUs for desktops and gaming PCs, while also powering high-end performance EPYC processors for data centers and enterprise servers. This chiplet design wasn't just cost-effective, it also enhanced the manufacturing yield and efficiency by minimizing the defects in the smaller chiplet compared to larger monolithic design. In fact, there's a famous quote from Intel, and they were essentially mocking AMD about their chiplet design. Like they were telling that AMD was like, look at this, they are like gluing together chips together. And this is obviously not gonna work. That's what Intel was believing back then in 2017 when Zen was launched. But with the success of Zen, AMD was able to capitalize on Intel's struggles with its 10nm process delay, and they were like struggling to offer higher core counts, better efficiency, and so on. Zen's introduction of more cores and threads for consumer processors redefined the expectations for multi-threaded performance, and especially in tasks like gaming and content creation. And the EPYC processor also took a significant bite of Intel's Xeon dominance in the server and enterprise market. So Intel, which had long enjoyed an overwhelming lead, was now facing fierce competitor in AMD. And AMD's chiplet strategy provided to be a game changer with better yields and scalability and pricing advantage. And as AMD began to gain ground in both consumer and enterprise sector, the success of the Zen and its chiplet architecture caught Intel off guard, and it kind of ever since struggled to keep up with the competition, both in terms of manufacturing and design. So if you go back a few years to 2010, Intel's leadership in the semiconductor manufacturing began to face serious headwinds. The company had historically been at forefront of process technology, but as the industry moved towards smaller nodes, Intel struggled to keep up. Remember that in the beginning of the video I told you that the customers design where the company is going, and this shift in customer demand can happen very quickly. Again, I mentioned the example of Nvidia recently with their very swift focus on AI from the gaming. A much swifter focus that even AMD kind of missed a little bit. But going back to Intel, this shift in consumer demand was going from stationary, essentially computers, to smartphones and laptops. You know, the iPhone revolution a few years before that with Steve Jobs with his legendary presentation in 2007 or 6 maybe. So yeah, the rise of smartphones and other mobile devices, which required smaller and more power efficient chips, was leading to companies like TSMC and Samsung to focus on the manufacturing side. TSMC in particular capitalized on booming mobile market, securing contracts from, let's say, major companies like Apple. And as TSMC pushed ahead with its advanced process node, Intel lagged behind, encountering delays with 10nm process. And one of the reasons that people forget, that the reason why TSMC kind of was really becoming a behemoth in this time frame is a couple of reasons. First of all, if you focus on smaller chips, right? And why do you focus on smaller chips? Well, the market is going towards the smaller chips. Again, smartphones, iPhones, Samsung Galaxies, Google Nexus, and Pixels later on. So the market was definitely going towards that smaller chip, right? If you ignoring the smaller chips, as Intel did in the mobile space, and you focus only on large chips, when you have any defect, you're gonna be hit harder. It's much, even if you have like a certain defect density in your manufacturing capability, if you design the chips much smaller than larger chips, even with the same defect density, you're gonna have a much better time and much better yield in smaller chips compared to larger chips. And since TSMC was focusing on smaller chips and Intel was focusing on larger chips, this is essentially what happens, because Intel didn't even bother to look at the smartphone market. And this essentially allowed TSMC to capitalize, as I said, on this market. Meanwhile, AMD's success with its Zen architecture and chiplet design only added to Intel's troubles. And remember that AMD not only kind of, in a way, designed much better designs, much more revolutionary designs with a chiplet, they also rid the wave of TSMC's manufacturing capability. And for once, AMD was kind of competing on a kind of level player field when it comes to transistor density and the actual transistor in the chips. Whereas in the early 2000s, AMD was always one node or two nodes behind Intel. So Intel wasn't necessarily they were never needing any revolution in the design of the chips, because they relied on the actual transistors being one or two generations better than what AMD could offer. So even if AMD offered very revolutionary designs, they still were, one or two nodes behind. But now with AMD using good nodes and revolutionizing maybe the biggest revolution in the chip history ever. I mean, that's the Zen moment for AMD, right? That's where Intel really started to struggle. So now going into today, we can see that Intel is now working to regain its position as a leader in the semiconductor manufacturing. One of the key initiatives is the development of the Intel 3 process that kind of seemed good, and they are not market leader with Intel 3, but they are essentially challenging TSMC to somewhat of a degree in terms of transistor and the quality of the transistor. When it comes to significant improvement, we are looking at Intel 14 and Intel 18A, which has been on the news recently. And Intel 18A is a process which is expected to again be a little bit of a revolutionary moment, but on the transistor manufacturing design. Intel 18A promises breakthrough in interconnect technology. They are potentially bringing massive improvements in power efficiency and performance. And if successful, 18A could definitely close the gap with TSMC and Samsung, and even somewhat put them in the forefront. Now with that, we are going to the Intel 18A recent news. We can see that there has been a lot of discussions, right? On one side, we had the news about Nvidia and Broadcom continuing to trialing Intel 18A, which is good. We then had, like very recently, just yesterday, the well-respected Ming-Chi Kuo that said that Intel is potentially delaying 18A, which will lead that their laptop CPUs, the successor to Lunar Lake, Panther Lake, will be delayed from second half of this year to very early, potentially early 2026. That's gonna help AMD for sure, but I think this is not a big concern. It's a big concern in terms of that the Panther Lake design will be a little bit probably delayed, maybe 1 or 2 quarters, but in the long term, TSMC is still nowhere near to be seen with the 2nm process. That's a late 2026 product with high volume manufacturing probably in 2027. And when I'm talking about, big chips, we are probably talking, 2027. Which means that Intel probably even with this delay will have slight advantage with time to market in compared to TSMC's 2nm. But again, going back to Intel, we can see that there's also some other discussions. The previous Intel CEO, Craig Barrett, is saying that they should fire the board of directors and rehire Pat Gelsinger, something that I've talked about. Frank D. Erie the leader in this in the board of director. I don't think he's the good fit for this Intel, leading Intel into the future. I definitely think that Pat Gelsinger was perfect fit for this role. Hopefully that's something that's gonna happen, but it's very unrealistic. They just fired the guy. But again, yeah, you know, some rumors about the 18A being delayed, more 18A delay, negative Wall Street discussions. So it's a lot that has been talked about. But I think in terms of the actual design, there are a few things on 18A that really seems to be signs of Intel regaining, at least being competitive, right? One of the two design differences is the major advancement, as this article on TrendForce says, which is ribbon FET, or Intel's take on gate-all-around, as they say in this article, which designs and allows for finer current control and reduces leakage, and it's essentially critical as chips become smaller and more densely packed. Then the other improvement for Intel in this generation is Intel Power VIA, or backside power delivery. Traditionally, the power is delivered like from the upside, and this new development is essentially the power is coming from the downside. So and somehow this makes that Intel can save a little bit of power and make the chips more efficient. So these two innovations is something that TSMC won't have, at least not in the same time. Potentially there's a lot of talk about gate-all-around on the 2 nanometer, but I don't think the first version of 2 nanometer will have that. Maybe an enhanced version of N2P maybe, so a performance variant of 2 nanometer. But anyway, so when you look at all of this, I think we are in a moment where the company is taking a beating today. Obviously the rest of the market was taken at least earlier today, and over the past 5 years they've been taking a beating. I believe that looking at the rumors, looking at the history of the company, looking at the big giant shifts when the least expected, remember, you know, the AMD on the verge of bankruptcy in 2017, I think that Intel on 18A and 14A has a huge opportunity, especially since TSMC is hiking prices left, right, center for the past 3 or 4 years. Obviously, they are the dominant player. There's no competition right now. So why wouldn't they, right? But this hiking of prices and putting, you know, leaving your foot on the gas a little bit, the likes of which Intel did 10 years ago, I think we are seeing somewhat clear signals that this might be the moment, right? Now, financially, Intel is in an absolute dire situation. I'm not telling you, first of all, this is not investment advice, but this is just me sharing my ideas and thoughts with you. But I'm not telling anyone that Intel's numbers are anything but really bad right now in terms of quarterly earnings, their net losses. They cut the dividend, which in my opinion at least was a good move. They should have done it way back 4, 5, 6 years ago, because everyone saw this coming other than Intel's board of directors and the leader there, Frank Tieri. But I do believe if 18A and 14A continue to be, you know, somewhat promising, and with this power via like the backside power delivery and gate-all-around and utilization of the new lithography machine from ASML, the second generation EUV machines. Remember that the first generation EUV adoption at Intel was slow, and is partly one of the reasons that Intel actually never got succeeded in 2017, and part of the reasons why they had all these manufacturing troubles last 8 or 9 years. But considering all of this, considering that the market cap of this company is less than $100 billion US, and the potential of being the leading fab on the planet, in addition to that having good portfolio of designs, if they like, the thing is, this is so binary, like if they get success on 18A, Intel could easily take that advantage over to their design and all of a sudden gain market share back also on the CPUs and be much more competitive on the GPU side. So this company, if 18A is correct, they could like take huge chunk of AMD's market, an absolute monumental chunk of TSMC's market, and a sizable chunk of Nvidia's market. So potentially this could easily be a trillion, probably multiple trillion US dollar company, right? As they become the main partner for many companies on the planet in terms of manufacturing semiconductor. So I do believe that the risk reward here is amazing. But again, it all depends on this like last Hail Mary. Like they have to be sharp and precise on 18A implementation, and it has to be enough with all these, delays. So within this year, this 12 months, they have to execute well on 18A. If not, obviously this could be a big trap, right? So I'm honest with you, but I don't, like, with the facts that we have on hands right now, I don't think this is a trap. I think this is an opportunity, but I could be wrong. So it's very important that you follow every single news and rumors on 18A. So yeah, that's gonna do it today. For today, it's been a long video, but I think it's an important one of the opportunities and risk out there. Again, this is not investment advice. Please engage in the discussion. And yeah, I've been a little bit sick over the past 2 or 3 months, so I've been a little bit slow in updating you. But thanks for your time. Thanks you for you watching my videos, liking, subscribing, even disliking. I appreciate it. And see you in the next one.